Look at the in, don't need. Look at that blazing technique. But you also gravitate, you were very interested in a lot of the more progressive rock you were talking about, the Mahavishnu and
Yeah, the rock thing was fine, and then when I started working on 48th Street in like 1972, 71, and at that point, prog was really starting to come into play. I met Chick Corea, Stanley Clark, a guy by the name of Al Di Meola, who just graduated from college, who took this guy Billy Connor, the old guitar player's place. So I was getting exposed to these types of players, and at the same time, I was also gravitating into the world of what is now called prog rock.
Yeah.
So bands like Yes, King Crimson, Genesis, Emerson, Lake and Palmer. So from that perspective, I guess the melodic portion of playing bass was something that really appealed to me. One could call it overplaying. One could. There are several things you can call it, but the ability to be able to move up and down the neck freely was something that I really gravitated to. It was only many, many years later when I started backing it down, when I heard about a guy by the name of James Jamerson, and getting into that more soul type and the Hitsville, USA, that whole Motown thing for me became really something that I started getting into. And as a matter of fact, when I work out, there are several things I do. I'll work with a metronome, but I do a lot of just listening to Motown stuff and just using that as a guideline, because that is just as fundamental as you can get. And I love doing that kind of stuff.
So you must love Standing in the Shadows of Motown as a Bible.
That movie is great. I read the book. Some of the stories in that were just amazing. I think one of the funniest stories that I know in that book is when they used to go next door to there was like a funeral parlor that they would go to next door, and Jamerson would take a couple of guys next door. They'd go in the back and they would drink. And at that time, I think Motown had been sold, or they had new management that had come in. And so they heard that the guys were over at the funeral home. So here come these new suits. They come walking in to the place, and they knock on the door, and they're looking for Jamerson, but they had the whole thing worked out. So the guy that ran the funeral parlor comes to the door, and he's just completely covered in blood from setting up bodies. And that was a great story. That, and where he opens up the pig's knuckles in the middle of in the winter. He threw him out of the car like in the middle of Michigan in the snow. So yeah, Jamerson was very big for me.
It's interesting how bass players of this generation, or your generation, I would say, started off with the Chris Squires and the guys who were more adventurous, then look backwards towards where they came from to play like a roots player.
Yeah, it's funny when you're flying around playing stuff and being very melodic. It's a beautiful thing, but then when you really strip it down, and you start to listen to really what's going on within the drums themselves, because when you're playing prog stuff, you're kind of locked into the drummer, but you're also adding color to the music itself. But it's only when I started to lay back and to start listening to the bass drum a little bit more that everything just became very crystal clear. Now it's a combination of trying to do both.
Yeah.
Trying to fill in cases where there may not be anything, or perhaps there's no keyboard part, and there's enough liberty in that little space to take a little run and not have it come off as being overplayed. That's the kind of stuff that I kind of like to do. So, and again, it's not overplaying, it's just picking the spot and putting it in there and then just getting back to where you were. So.